Hey, Christian Academy, Dr. Shell here, and I'm glad we could have a little extra time on this special chapel, kind of a devotion in your classroom. And I hope you had a lot of fun with your palm branches, shouting and singing and carrying on. And this next week is this coming Sunday is Palm Sunday. And then you'll be on spring break, and then at the end of spring break is Easter. So we won't be together again until after Easter. And I hope that you and your family have an awesome time celebrating the resurrection. But I want to talk about Palm Sunday and the events that happened, because things changed pretty dramatically. We know from the scriptures that when Jesus came into Mount of Olives, everybody was happy and excited and shouting, "Hosanna, and blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." And some of them thought that this was it. Jesus was going to take over and he was going to rule the world. And they had no idea that he had a very different plan. And so we're going to do a little activity with our palm branches, and they look so cool and beautiful. And we're going to change them quite a bit. Some of your younger classes, maybe you'll do this with your teacher, and maybe you'll just do one palm branch. But if you're in your classrooms and if your teacher wants you to do it, you could all do this together, because I think it's pretty dramatic to show sort of how things went in just 1 week when everybody's shouting for Jesus. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this palm branch and we're going to count 13 individual little leaves. So we're going to start at the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So there's my 13. So what happens after Palm Sunday and all that celebration is Jesus begins to move toward his real mission, which is to save the world. And the crowd didn't like him. After that, the people and the authorities began to sort of stir everybody up that they thought Jesus was up to something and he was going to cause some trouble. And so we found out that all these people that were cheering and carrying on for Jesus, they really weren't in it because they believed in him. Maybe they wanted to see a miracle. Maybe they wanted some of the food that he was producing. Maybe they liked some of the fun things he was saying, but they weren't really disciples and followers of Jesus. They were just in the crowd, and one day they're cheering and the next day they're not. Sort of like what happens, some people really like their sports team, and then if they lose, then all of a sudden they don't like them anymore. And so we're going to count 13 palm branches, and I'm going to put my finger right here. But everything below 13, all these other branches are going to represent the crowd. And you know what we're going to do? We're just going to take them right off. Because you know what? They didn't follow Jesus anyway. And so we're just going to tear all these extra branches, and we're just going to take them off, pile them up there on your desk or on the floor. And now we're left with 13 branches. We had a beautiful palm. It was huge and full of life because all those people in that crowd were excited for Jesus. But then when he started really talking about his mission, all of a sudden people weren't that interested in following him anymore. And then that leads us to what we call the Last Supper. Jesus went up with his disciples to an upper room that they had prepared to have a special meal together called Passover. And so as Jesus is sitting there with his disciples and he's sharing with them, and he's going to have this last dinner with them that we celebrate when we in our churches celebrate communion, we are celebrating the Lord's Supper, that Last Supper together. Well, while they were having dinner even, Judas, who was going to be the one who betrayed Jesus, he had a plan for that night that he was going to go and tell the authorities where Jesus was so that they could come and get him and take him to trial and execute him. So we're going to take this branch right here. We're going to let that be Judas, and we're going to take that one off, and we're going to just throw it aside because now Judas left him. And now it's getting even smaller crowd of people following Jesus. And so after the Last Supper, Jesus and his disciples, they go to the Mount of Olives. This was a place that was really special to Jesus. He liked to go there and pray and be with his disciples and teach. And so they went there after the Last Supper, And Jesus was praying and praying and praying. He was really praying that maybe God had another plan, because this plan wasn't looking so good. It went from people cheering and hooting and hollering to looking pretty skimpy, because he was down to just a few followers. And he knew that what was coming was going to be painful. And he wanted to pray to God, if there's any other way, let's do that. But if not, he said, I want your will, not mine, to be done. And so after he got done praying, there was this ruckus up there in the garden, and he knew that Judas had brought the guards to come and arrest him. And so they moved in to capture Jesus, and he didn't fight him back. He knew they were coming. And then what happened is surprising. This is in Mark's Gospel. I'm reading chapter 14 and verse 50. It says, and they all fled and ran away. Those disciples that were so close to Jesus, had been there with him all the time, not like the crowd that just came and went. These were his disciples. And they turned around and they left him and fled. Now we're going to take away 9 of these. So we're going to be left with 3. So count them, do it carefully here, because we're going to, all the different apostles, Andrew and John, well, John's going to come back in, all the different disciples, we're going to just represent the fact that they're taking off and leaving Jesus alone, and we're down to just 3. Boy, it's getting sad, isn't it? It's getting sad to think that it was so much like this, so exciting and full of life, and lots of people followed Jesus when it was easy. But as he moved closer and closer to the cross, less and less people were interested in what he had to say. And so we're going to let these represent Peter and John and Jesus' mother, Mary. And so as Jesus goes to go on trial, they drag him into the court, and they have this ridiculous trial, and it wasn't even a fair trial at all. And they put Jesus on trial, but Peter kind of followed along. Even though it says everybody else fled, Peter kind of kept his distance, but he followed along because he wanted to see what was going to happen to his Lord. And you know the story. 3 times people came up to Peter and said, hey, aren't you one of his followers? Wait, aren't you with Jesus? Aren't you one of those guys? And Peter said, I don't know him. I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. Leave me alone. And 3 times he denied Jesus. And the Bible tells us that even then there was a sign that Jesus gave, that a rooster was going to crow. And then it says that Jesus turned and looked at Peter, and Peter went away. And so even Peter, one of his very closest disciples, turned away and left him. And this is all we got left, boys and girls. This is it. And so as Jesus makes his way after his trial to the cross, and it's a cruel way to treat anybody, and they nail him to a cross and they put him up there to die. And as he's suffering, Jesus says some really amazing things. He says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. He prayed for the very people that were in the process of killing him, because he didn't want their sins to be counted against them. That's the reason he was dying, so that they could be forgiven. He said, Father, forgive them for what they're doing. He then looked and he saw there was his mother. What a terrible thing to have your mother watching you as you're being tortured like that. And then Jesus knew, because he was her son, that he was going to leave her alone. And so he looked down and he saw John, and he said to John, John, I want you to take care of my mother. And he told his mother, I want you to let John, you go with John, he'll take care of you. And so even then Jesus gave away, well, not gave away, but gave his mother to be cared for by John. And he asked John to leave and take care of his mother. And so, boys and girls, all we're left with is this little twig. And we're going to let this stem is going to represent Jesus for us. When Jesus came to die on the cross, he was all alone. It was just him. But he was willing to suffer all of that because he loved you so much. And he wanted you to be with him. And he was willing to be absolutely alone and hurting because he wanted you to be with him. Boys and girls, have you ever been really alone? Like scared, kind of alone, like you really didn't know what was happening and where you were? Jesus was alone on that cross, that he was dying for you, and he was willing to go from this to this because he loved you that much. Jesus was emptied himself. He came from heaven where he had everything, came to earth as a human, and then the book of Philippians chapter 2 says it this way, that although he existed as God and did not regard equality with God as something he had to hang on to, but he emptied himself. He emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being made in the likeness of humans, and being formed like a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Boys and girls, as we move toward Palm Sunday and we think about how excited the crowd was, as long as Jesus was doing things they liked, as long as it was easy, they didn't mind following him. But when it got hard, and when it turned into more and more obvious that it was going to involve suffering, people turned away from him until ultimately he was left all by himself on that cross so that he would die alone for us. That is amazing love, amazing grace. And that's how much he loved us. Would you bow with me, and we're going to just pray together. God, I thank you that you loved us so much that you sent your only Son to die on a cross alone for us. Thank you that you loved us that much. Help us, Father, to accept that love as a gift that you offer, and that we might live our lives in that grace, in that love. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. All right, well, I hope you have a wonderful spring break. I hope you have a great Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday, and hope that we will be reminded of Jesus' amazing love as he died alone on the cross.